Hello and welcome to a video talking about the Mexican-American War and as to why it was or not justified, and even if it was not justified, was it good? Now, people really do have a really basic understanding of the Mexican-American War, and I think that's a real shame, but let's get into it in further detail than maybe you were told in your neoliberal high school, as I was. I would say that the date began in April 25th, 1846, and ended not even 2 years later in February 2nd of 1848. This made James K. Polk a famous guy in America for a while because it goes with the narrative of manifest destiny. That is similar to the white man's burden if instead you replace the blacks with the land of an area like the continent of the United States, in which America and those inhabitants of which should explore out west and conquer those lands and manifest their own destiny as a continental force, really. And that would include conquering the lower 48 contiguous states. Now, that's a pretext for the vague notion of conquering the Southwest. That is not necessarily a hatred against Mexico, the Mexicans, or even the Spanish before them, or the French Empire that owned part of Mexico for a while. Now, let me give you a timeline as to which you can get the comprehension of why things started the way they were. If you look, you would see that the U.S. Senate wanted to annex. There was a proposition by Polk to annex Texas into the United States, but of course that was defeated on June 6th in the Senate, and so there was no treaty of annexation there. And then Polk wins in November of 1844 to become president of the United States against Henry Clay. Okay? And what you need to know about Mexico at this time is that it was going under a lot of changes, not necessarily territorially, but it was dealing with a lot of revolutions. Not only that, but it was also dealing with the after effects of civil wars, etc. At this point in history, Santa Anna had been in control of Mexico for a couple decades, but interruptedly because there was so much political turmoil in Mexico at the time. So while on a map Mexico is all together, it is very disparate, and the density of population in places like California were stunningly low when considering the fact that it is such a great area. Okay, so now a war goal was set even in the campaign of becoming the president of the United States under James Polk campaign. And that promise was to necessarily take over those lands eventually, annex Texas, of course. That was all but a dog whistle at that point. And as seen, the Mexican president Herrera sent Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna in exile into Cuba. This is important because Santa Anna was a general, so by getting rid of a powerful general, you're necessarily weakening the rank and file military structure in your country, which leaves you susceptible to invasion. Okay, then let's cover the next thing. The Texas Convention of votes for the annexation to the United States in July 4th of 1844. Very interesting. This very much bolsters the idea that they're going to take over the Southwest. While the Mexicans and the Texans had their own problems already, Mexico still wanted to annex Texas, or at the very least, keep part of it, which is about 100 miles from the Rio Grande to the Nueces River. A big problem that people look over is the fact that Mexicans did not want to really bother with the white Anglo Texans that were Protestant, as they were diametrically opposed to Mexico, and very likely to integrate into a Mexican community, you were required to become a Catholic and speak Spanish, which is ironic because a lot of Mexicans now in America don't speak Spanish, but that's a very important footnote to get. Now let's look into the next thing. San Luis Potosi, it's very hard to say. That garrison gets the overthrow of Herrera, and the government of Jose Joaquin Herrera collapses in Mexico City, the capital of the Mexican Empire. Very important. So, like I said, a lot of instability in the state of Mexico as it is taken over again by Santa Anna. Now imagine this. The Yucatan, the state itself, declares independence from Mexico in 1846. So things are really falling apart, and it is very interesting. The Americans were wanting a conflict that so much is true, so they had a casus belli, which would then give them a mandate to the Congress to declare war, and that's exactly what Polk wanted. Now, there was a confrontation on the border of Texas, and that was necessarily upon which the Mexicans owned at the time, but it was a disputed territory. I will not lie about that. This is why there's so much contention as to whether or not it was justified legally, and if not so, if it was worth it at the end. But really, it was that the Mexicans were in their rightful territory as they knew it themselves. Americans went to that disputed territory, said it was theirs. Whoever fired upon which doesn't really matter ultimately, but it would seem as if that on May 13th, Congress declared war, despite the Northerners in the Union being opposed to the war. This opens up a new dynamic, by the way, the new dynamic necessarily being that the Southerners wanted to expand into the Southwest and spread slavery and inject capital into these lowly densely populated Latino countryside areas so that they could profit off of the area, of course. And that only makes sense. So Northerners, for electoral reasons, did not want to give up the Southwest to the South. And it has parallels to today, even with the Southwest going to the other side, and it is very interesting. So let's keep in mind, only about 75,000 Mexican citizens lived north of the Rio Grande, so it wasn't that much of a deal to lose that territory, as there was not that many people, so America had the balls to attack Mexico on Mexican land. And to be fair, the Mexicans got they got completely destroyed in the battles of Palo Alto and the other one in that area, and that's going to show that the Mexicans completely got destroyed in this war. They weren't ready for the war. They were unjustifiably put into the situation by America, and they clearly could not hold on to their giant empire, so they had to concede to their modern borders now, almost. What this goes to show is that Mexico has a lot of instability, and it is still less stable than desirable, and I think America took advantage of that. Now, would you say, was it moral for America to invade Mexico? And of course it wasn't. It was clearly Mexican land, and it is completely ridiculous to then claim that because Mexico fired on American soldiers on what was their own soil, that necessitates a war. And of course, there was the motive behind that. Okay, so it is completely ridiculous to assert that America was morally in the right. So I think the Mexican-American War was not justified on the respective case of legality, though I would say that overall, on the net balance, was it beneficial to America? And I would say yes. While they get to annex Texas, New Mexico, they get Colorado, they get part of Wyoming, they get most of Arizona out of that direct annexation of 1848. You get Nevada, you get California, etc. You get a lot of land, millions and millions of dollars out of that. And not only that, sure, America paid money to Mexico, but that is peanuts compared to what money they extracted from the land. Texas has a very big wealth of oil. If you were to think about it now, Mexico right now, if they were to have the Southwest, would be more powerful than Russia. They'd be more powerful than a place like India, of course. They'd have more power than any other Latin American country by far. So, of course, America benefited, and now, if you were to compare a city in Texas, any city, whether it be white or black, that is a nicer city and has more money than the contemporary Mexican city, by and large. There's exceptions, but it would seem as if the American Constitution, the American demographics, and the Americans in general could run that area better than the Mexicans could up until that point. That is clear, and that is obvious. Whereas the Mexicans would have ran the place not as well. That is just clear. That is clear. The Mexicans did not benefit whatsoever from the war. It was a huge opportunity cost what they lost. The land was stolen from them. In reality, that causes some very subtle resentment of the American people because supposedly the gringos stole their land. And while that is a true thing, they should get over it. But look, personally, I would say that the Mexicans lost a lot of land. They lost a lot of future money. A lot of their population was displaced. And fundamentally speaking, now they have this huge demographic problem between the U.S. and other Chicano type of Mexicans in America. This is a huge electoral issue. Now, let's cover quickly the Gadsden Purchase, which was the purchase basically of southern Arizona, so up until Tucson, basically, or Phoenix. The Mexicans held on for a couple more years, I believe, and that was bought off by America. And that, of course, was a godsend to whoever lives in Tucson now, because you're in America, guys. That's an amazing thing. It's a blessing, really. So, to summarize the video, the Mexican-American War was BS on its premise. It overwhelmingly helped America rather than helped Mexico. Of course, that was the point. The claims that Polk had for the Southwest expansion was selfish and it was illegal, but yet Mexico at the same time couldn't really handle its own land, so it was only probable that their land would be taken and stolen. But as in Europe, where the Germans lost a lot of land, they're not complaining. Mexico should not complain at all. There should be no bad blood in this, because I think it was for the better. Because California is a lot better than Mexico in a lot of respects. Arizona is a lot better than Mexico in a lot of respects. And even Mexican Americans would admit that where they are now is better than what it likely would have been if the people of Mexico stayed there completely and the Mexican Empire stayed alive, clearly. So that's my opinion. Now, as to some people that will say that Aztlan or something, there's some French people, such as the alt-right, but imagine that they're Mexican. These people want a new state, an American state, a new reparation sort of partition of America, in which the land stolen from Mexico would go back to the Mexican people. I completely disagree, and I disavow with that, guys, for the end of the video. Seriously, that's dumb. That's not America first. That is not Mexico first, even if you think about it long term. Okay? Look, what America has taken from Mexico illegally has been paid back by Mexico by sending millions of illegal immigrants to exploit the land. Okay? So, either side, water under the bridge. Get it? Okay? Let's get law and order back. America hopefully should be able to have its own cities and be able to protect them. As seen now, there is a lot of racial tension, and I would hope that nobody gets too mad at each other in the comments. Because we're all Americans, the ones that we live in America. And the people that live in Mexico are Mexican, but we can respect each other, and I think clearly that this is historical. Thank you for watching.